Doctors could be on the brink of a breakthrough.
Migraines.
How to control them. Tame a migraine.
A severe migraine.
Throbbing, recurring headaches.
Given all the noise, navigating the migraine experience can be confusing and scary, but you do not have to do it alone. Welcome to the Migraine Guy Podcast, the official podcast of themigraineguy.com and theheadachereview.com. Now, here's your host.
All right, everyone, welcome to another edition of the Migraine Guy podcast. I am Kevin here, aka the Migraine Guy. If you're new to the podcast, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button. And if you're listening on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcast, I hope you will leave a 5-star review with some kind comments. Those reviews and comments help other people in our shoes who have similar interests to find this podcast. And we are, we don't monetize the podcast. We don't do much with it for those purposes, but we do want other migraine sufferers to find it. That way they can hear consistent content and be connected with other migraine sufferers, because chronic pain is not fun to face alone, and the more you can know and the more you can be connected with other people, the better your chances for success are. So the way we start the podcast is by diving into my recent week with migraines. Then we'll hop into some migraine news, something interesting that has come out recently. Then we hit a migraine tip of the week, something that you could practically implement in your migraine journey to help either better communicate with your doctor or family or friends or employers, something you could start taking supplement-wise in order to maybe help combat a few of your migraines per month, or something interesting and fun that you can do in relation to your migraine. And then we close the show with a listener question, a migraine listener question, and try to give an answer to it or direct you to people who can, or sometimes people want to share their stories or their comments that they have, comments on their own experience or comments about their doctor or something like that. Something to help the community feel like they're connected to one another is what the goal is, and that's what we do in that section. And then we close the show with just some final thoughts. So that being said, let's hop into my migraine week. My migraines have been a little intense lately. Last week, I think I said that mostly what I'd been experiencing were my secondary symptoms, not the migraine pain so much, but definitely the cognitive fog, the jaw tightness, the neck tightness, the inability to kind of find the words that you want to say. It's as if I was getting a migraine without the pain, which was new for me. I hadn't really experienced that, but that was last week. This week, the pain has made a triumphant return. I didn't ever reach anything above a 7, but there were at least 2 days last week for about 4 hours each where I definitely was in that 7 pain range and kind of all hands on deck trying to take on the necessary steps. Sorry, I'm just having a hard time talking today. I was trying to take the necessary steps to prevent the migraine from reaching any level 8, 9, or 10 stage, because those are the absolute worst. And thankfully they didn't. They kind of hovered in that 7 range. I took plenty of water, made sure I took my ginger supplements. I did, even though I'm supposed to be in an off cycle with my tizanidine, because it kind of builds up in my system after about 3 or 4 weeks, I did take a couple just to fall asleep, because, I just wanted the pain to go away. And even though it's not an abortive medication, it works better than abortives, because it does put me to sleep for at least 4 hours if I take it. And if I take it in conjunction with melatonin, I can usually get 6 hours of solid sleep. And I very rarely have migraines that I go to bed with that I wake up with. And so if I can get myself to bed for 6 hours, there's, a 90-ish% chance that I'm not going to wake up with one. So that really stinks to do during the middle of the day. I try to, not do that. I try to take other means to reduce the migraine pain, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do. So that's been that last week. As I said, I've been cycling off the tizanidine because of its buildup effect in my system, because my body kind of gets used to it, which I guess is very normal. I started asking a bunch of people about tizanidine, and they all said roughly the same thing, that yeah, it's going to build up in your system, and you can either go off of it for a few weeks to get it out of your system, or you can up your dosage. And of course, upping your dosage only has so many uppages you could do before you reach an unsafe limit. So I've decided to go with the off-cycle approach. And so starting Monday, I'll be taking it every day before bed, 2 milligrams every day before bed. And then in about 3 or 4 weeks, I'll probably have to stop doing that for a couple weeks because of the buildup, and then we'll get back to it. So I don't know how long this cycling is going to last. I don't really have a specific plan with my neurologist right now about what to do long term. Botox or Aimovig, the CGRP meta are of course options, but of course they have expense associated with them, and so We've talked about that in the past, and in fact, if you're interested in the CGRP meds, we did a fairly deep dive into it in last week's podcast, so make sure to check that one out if you are interested and have questions about the new CGRP meds or future CGRP meds. So that's kind of it for me. Nothing real to report, just, some pain, some symptoms, all the kind of boilerplate stuff that goes with getting migraines chronically. So that being said, let's move on to some migraine news. All right, this week's bit of migraine news comes to us from the financial world. There was not a lot of discussion, so far as I saw, about this particular issue regarding one of the upcoming CGRP medications being developed by one of the big three pharmaceutical companies that are still working on their particular CGRP medication. So I thought I would bring it to your attention. Now, if you are familiar with the CGRP med stuff, then this is probably going to be a little redundant for you in the beginning. But if you're not familiar with the CGRP medication, we did discuss it in some detail last podcast. So make sure you go back to last week's podcast 39, and check it out. But basically, 4 big pharmaceutical companies are working on a medication designed to prevent migraines by targeting these peptide receptors or the peptides themselves in the CGRP system, because those levels tend to be higher in migraine sufferers, or at least when migraines are occurring. And so these medications attempt to control those levels, and the studies for most of these medications show that results in at least some migraine reduction per month for migraine patients. And on average, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 migraines per month being reduced. And so that means basically in a year, you'd have 48 extra days. So you'd get over a month back of your life if these meds work for you on average. And so there is the Aimovig medication that everyone has been talking about for the last few weeks since the FDA approved it, produced by Amgen Novartis is the pharmaceutical company. But there is another migraine preventative, another CGRP that's on its way to be approved probably by the end of this year by another pharmaceutical company, and their name is Teva or Teva, T-E-V-A. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, so I'm going to go with Teva because it kind of rhymes with my name. And basically, Teva is still on track to have the FDA approve their CGRP medication for migraine prevention by the end of the year, but they were also testing whether or not their CGRP medication was going to be helpful as a preventative to people who get chronic cluster headaches. Now, if you're not familiar with what a cluster headache is, count your blessings, because apart from a thunderclap headache, cluster headaches are the most painful headache condition known to humanity. And so people who get them chronically are in extreme pain very, very often. And I know migraines in the 9-10 pain range are extremely horrible too. I'm not saying that they're not, but cluster headaches, if you can't imagine it, are worse. And at least from the people that I've talked to and the stuff that I have read. So the downside to this article, of course, is that Teva is not going to be able, because of this late stage trial failure that they've undergone, it has not been shown to help reduce chronic cluster headaches for people who get them, and so that's kind of a downside to it. Now, silver lining to this is that they're still testing whether or not it's going to be helpful to episodic cluster headache patients. And basically the difference between something that's episodic versus something that's chronic is if it's chronic, it's 14 or more per month, and if it's episodic, it's less than 14 per month. And so hopefully there will be some use for this medication with episodic cluster headache patients. And of course, it's still got all of the good stuff that you would want from a CGRP med for migraine patients. I'll put a link to a study that initially was looking at the Teva CGRP medication and the stuff that they found when they did the study and the kind of reductions that they saw. So if you're a migraine patient, there's still lots and lots of hope to hold out on for the CGRP meds. That part is still untouched by this late stage trial of their CGRP med. But if you're a chronic cluster headache patient, kind of wondering where your medication is or why there hasn't been any advancement on that, this is not going to be good news for you. So it's a bit of a downer, even though it's still some good news for migraine patients. The stuff relating to migraine is still all there. None of that is being challenged or thrown away, but finding out whether or not these CGRP meds can have a broader audience is it's not looking super hopeful right now, and that's part of why this was emphasized in financial articles, because people who are wondering whether or not they should invest in companies like Teva or Amgen, Novartis, who are coming up with these targeted migraine medications. When a company says that they think that their med is going to work not only for migraine patients but also cluster patients, that means that they're going to have larger market share, a lot more customers, and so investors are more likely to want to buy that stock, for example. And then when these late-stage trials kind of show that they can't deliver on those promises, then that means that Teva isn't going to have any unique advantage over, Aimovig, and Aimovig is already on the market, so people are going to start using it, month after month until Teva gets on the market. And then if people are having success with the Aimovig, why would they switch to Teva's product? And so that's why it was in a lot of financial news. But I thought it was interesting for headache and migraine patients, because I was kind of hopeful when the CGRP meds came out that there was going to be more use for it than just migraine patients, because so many headache conditions are so disabling, and if the CGRP, peptide and receptor was broader than just migraine patients, then that would mean the CGRP meds could work for more people than just migraine patients. But it's not looking too good right now, at least on the chronic cluster headache front. So they will just continue to have to rely on the meds that they have right now, and that's it. Some bad news there. So hopefully this will spur, more research into, neurological conditions like cluster headache and migraine, to get more meds out there, do more research, find out what receptors and peptides affect the cluster patient, and target those with some medications. So it's a bit of a, kind of some downside if you were hoping for these medications to have broader application than just migraine. But that being said, let us move on to your migraine tip of the week. All right, this week's migraine tip of the week has to do with a fantastic online resource that you can use to help understand, one, how your doctor is going to be analyzing the symptoms that you're telling them and the ways that the medications are working with you, but also will give you an expanded vocabulary and a way to talk about your migraine or headache condition to help you convey the severity and the seriousness of it to other people. That way they can understand more fully, rather than you trying to come up with the words on your own. And you might be able to do a pretty good job, but it also always helps to have kind of a set way of talking about a condition in order to get people to understand what it is. Especially if we all talk a particular way about it, then we can kind of break some stereotypes and engineer the concept a little bit better based on what we want it to do for us. Now, the website is the actual URL is a bit of a mouthful. It's ICHD-3.org. Now, the reason it's that is because it stands for the International Classification of Headache Disorders, the 3rd edition. Now, the 3rd edition is the most current edition that's actually been approved by the relevant authorities who oversee its production. I think the 4th edition is kind of in a beta testing mode right now, so there will eventually be a 4th edition, and I assume the URL will then change to -4 instead of -3, but for now we have the 3rd edition, and you can search everything that the international classification has in terms of information on headache disorders. For example, if you go to the migraine section, they have the general heading of migraine, and then they have a number of different subheadings under there. They have, of course, migraine without aura and migraine with aura, but under migraine with aura, they go into a number of details and give you relevant diagnostic criteria for it. Additionally, they have chronic migraine, complications, probable migraine, and a host of other things that you can read to better equip yourself with an understanding of all of the variations that migraine brings with it. For example, under the heading of general migraine, they have the description, quote, headache occurring on 15 or more days, months, for more than 3 months, which on at least 8 days per month has the features of migraine headache. And then they have diagnostic criteria, headache, migraine-like or tension-like, on less than or equal than or greater to 15 days a month for 3 months, which was part of the description they already had, But then they have occurring in a patient who has had at least 5 attacks fulfilling, and then they give a link to an area that has fulfillment criteria. And then they have a little bit more about the ways in which it gets categorized. Now, it is a little technical because it's designed for people who are doing technical diagnosing, but that is the kind of stuff that you need to be equipped with in order to understand what is going on with your condition and why your doctor is giving you particular diagnoses that they are giving you. They also have things for cluster headaches. They have things for persistent new daily persistent headaches. They have tension type headaches. They have all sorts of stuff. So if you want to understand what your doctor or your specialist is going to be thinking about, at least, or a resource that they themselves are going to consult when you come to see them, you need to at least bookmark this and look at it occasionally. It's going to be very helpful to people who want to understand, well, what's the difference between this particular version of migraine and that particular version of migraine? And when you talk to your doctor, you can of course print these out and bring them in and say, well, you thought that I had this particular version, but look at criteria 2. I don't have that, but if you look at this other migraine condition, I have all 3 of those criteria. So maybe my condition is better categorized as this, and maybe we could try this family of medication instead of that. Now, like I said, this is slightly academic once you read a few of these entries in the classification. It's going to be a little dense and sometimes annoying and maybe not worth your time to try to understand all of it. But if you can understand some of it, you'll have ways of talking to your doctor that they will understand, which is always important, but you'll have ways of filtering what they say through this resource and helping them understand what your condition really is and not what they think it is, because chances are they haven't seen too many migraine patients, and so their experience is going to be quite limited. So I will put a link to this in the show notes. Feel free to hit me up on social media if you have any questions about it. I can't, answer every single question about it because I am not a specialist, but I do know a couple people that consult with it pretty regularly, and we can of course try to reach out to them, or I could reach out to them to get answers to your questions. But above all, this is just a very good resource because it is basically like the Bible of headaches. This is the manual that gives physicians the proper ways to diagnose particular conditions. And it's going to change, right, as we get more nuanced and fine-tuned understanding of particular conditions. Some will be added, some will be modified, some will be taken away, because that's just the way better understanding goes, especially with health conditions like this. The ways in which we think about them right now get better as time goes on, so then we have to modify what we thought we were talking about. But all in all, it's a free resource. It's very, very accessible. The website's very clean and well laid out. You can find what you want very easily. The search function works very well, and you can, of course, take the URL from there and paste it in one of your favorite migraine groups and ask people to help you understand what is being said there if it's too confusing. Some of the ways in which they do categorize are very, very dense, and so sometimes having someone unpack it for you has been helpful for me, so I assume it will be helpful for you. All right, that being said, we are going to use this website to help understand and get to the answer of a listener question of the week, which we're going to get to right now. All right, this migraine question of the week has to do with what are the differences. This was asked by Michael Martin in our migraine support group. What are the differences between new daily persistent headache, migraine, and cluster headache? And Michael is a long-time headache and migraine warrior. He knows the answer to this question, but it is a good question to ask because these the definitions, the descriptions of the conditions, and the ways in which doctors diagnose them are important to know because it one exposes kind of the weakness of our current understanding of headache conditions, but also shows the ways in which that your doctor is going to likely anyway be trying to categorize what you're telling them. So being able to understand that side of it can help you describe it more accurately. So the probably the most difficult to diagnose condition right now is new daily persistent headache, or NDPH for short. It used to be called chronic headache with acute onset or de novo chronic headache, but the most current term that medical professionals will use is new daily persistent headache. And that name is descriptive for a number of reasons. One, the new part of the phrase is because it's supposed to be a headache that becomes chronic but wasn't experienced in the past. It's not something that you can point to a relative and say, well, they had, really, really bad headaches, and I have really bad headaches, so there must be some genetic component. Basically, you're a clean slate who all of a sudden starts getting very, very bad headache pain. Additionally, one of the main criteria is that the occurrence of these headaches is clearly remembered. You can sometimes isolate the day, the hour, the moment when they hit, and that is, for some reason, very, very important. I think it has to do with the fact that there is no history. The fact that they're out of the blue makes them so memorable. Now, the pain lacks characteristic features and may be migraine-like or tension-like or have elements of both. And so the pain lacks characteristic features. So if you get migraine, for example, sometimes your pain has very, very characteristic features. It can feel like your jaw is clamping so tight that your teeth are going to shatter, or that your neck has 1,000 needles in it, or that your head is going to be compressed like it's in a vice, or any of the other kind of standard features that migraine pain has. But in general, new daily persistent headache lacks those features. Now, it may be migraine-like or tension-like, as the description says, or have elements of both, but the main thing here in the description is that the pain lacks characteristic features. Now, let's see, the diagnostic criteria that medical professionals will use is, as you're going to see, somewhat ambiguous. Now, let's see, condition A says that it has to have B and C, so that's not super helpful. Condition B is that the headache itself is distinct and the onset is clearly remembered, with pain becoming continuous and unremitting within 24 hours. So this goes back to the clearly remembered portion of the description. The pain, for some reason, just kind of, you get flashbulb memory almost, and you just remember it clearly. And then the pain becomes continuous and nonstop within 24 hours. And it needs to be, this is condition C, it needs to be present for more than 3 months. So if this happened 1 month ago, one time, that does not mean you have new daily persistent headaches. Why? Well, because these are persistent, and something that happened 1 month ago is not. And then condition D is basically on every single potential headache condition, and it says that it's not better accounted for by other diagnoses. And that's, of course, going to be the case for all of these. You can't have it if it's better accounted for by other things. At least from the medical professional's opinion. So that's what new daily persistent headache is. The main features, as we said, is that it hits out of nowhere. You don't have a history in your own life, and you don't have a family history with it, and the pain is clearly remembered, and that pain doesn't have any particular features, unlike migraine or tension headaches. You have to have it for more than 3 months, and the medications that will be used might be very, very similar to migraine patients, but definitely not going to be identical, given that the neurological side of the new daily persistent headaches is somewhat different. So, having a basic understanding of NDPH is important, because your doctor might throw it around and you can say, well, actually, my grandma, she had really bad migraines, and my aunt has really bad migraines, and my mom, until I was born, had really bad migraines. So we do have a family history, so it's not really as out of the blue as new daily persistent headaches would require. So that's just an important, condition to keep in mind when you're thinking about the different ways in which new daily persistent headache can be diagnosed. So when we move on to chronic migraine, the ICHD's description is that it's a headache occurring on 15 or more days per month for more than 3 months, which on at least 8 days per month has the features of migraine headache. So the reason that they're phrasing it that way, of course, is that if you're going to be chronic, you have to have it 15 or more days per month for more than 3 months. Some people get, maybe a couple months where they'll have maybe 20 migraines, and then they go away. That would not put you in the chronic category. You have to be over 3 months experiencing 15 or more per month in order to be chronic. And then at least on 8 days of each month, you have the features of migraine headache. And of course, those features factors are going to be listed above in the classification manual. Now, when it comes to diagnostic criteria, there are 4 of them, and of course the last one is the same as the new daily persistent headache, that it's not better accounted for by other diagnoses, so we'll ignore that going forward. So the 3 main conditions for diagnosing you with migraine are: 1, that you have a headache, migraine-like or tension-like, on at least 15 days per month for 3 more months, and that's just what the description said. Condition B is that the migraine is occurring in a patient who has had at least 5 attacks, fulfilling various conditions listed elsewhere, mainly that you either have migraine without aura or migraine with aura. So if the conditions of a migraine without aura are what you've had at least 5 times in that month, then you would qualify, and if you've had migraine with an aura, then you would qualify that, you would satisfy that criteria, sorry. And then, of course, they have a slightly more detailed condition C, which basically just highlights, again, migraine without aura and migraine with aura. And the reason that they're doing that, I think anyway, the reason that it would make sense to put these kind of conditions with aura and not with aura in there are if you get migraine without aura, you're going to have certain features that are going to be diagnosable. And if you have migraine with aura, that's going to bring different features that are diagnosable. So if you satisfy all of those, you get to be diagnosed with chronic migraine. Now, the third part of C is that it is believed by the patient to be migraine at onset and relieved by triptan or ergot. And of course, triptans and ergots don't work for every migraine patient, so of course it is a little weird that they include this in the diagnostic criteria, but it does say believed by the patient to be migraine at the onset, and so you get to determine whether or not you satisfy one of the diagnostic criteria for migraine. So that's kind of interesting. But you can see, at least, even though both of the kind of descriptions and diagnostic criteria so far for both new daily persistent and chronic migraine, they've been a little ambiguous. They are very different, right? The description and diagnostic criteria for new daily persistent headache does not sound like the diagnostic criteria and description for chronic migraine. Chronic migraine has to do with days per month, and it has to do with aura or not aura, mostly, whereas daily persistent headache has to do with the immediacy of the attack, whether or not you have a personal or family history with migraine, and whether or not you can clearly remember the onset of the headache attack. So those are the 2 big ways in which the concept of chronic migraine and new daily persistent headache are fleshed out. Let's move on to cluster headache here. Cluster headache has a much more detailed diagnostic criteria, and in fact it doesn't have a description here in the ICHD, which is interesting. So let's just get to the diagnostic criteria for cluster headache. Nasal congestion, excessive eyelid watering, forehead and facial swelling, forehead and facial flushing, sensation of fullness in the ears. Those are one set of symptoms that you could have. Another set is just a sense of restlessness or agitation. And then condition D is that the headaches occur with a frequency between 1 every other day up to 8 per day. And so those conditions make it very, very different than migraine, not because of the frequency of the pain and not even because of the intensity of the pain, although many people who get cluster headaches are thought to be the people who experience the most pain in human life. Cluster headaches are supposed to be one of the most, if not the most, painful events you can undergo. But you can see that the ways in which the condition C spell out different symptoms is importantly different than either new daily persistent headache or chronic migraine. There aren't a lot of migraine patients who have, excessive watering in their eyes or forehead swelling or facial flushing. We do get aura symptoms. We do have lots of symptoms that are fairly unique to migraine, but those typically aren't the ones that you think of. You think of light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, olfactory sensitivity. You think about dizziness. You think about mental fog. You think about neck tightness, jaw pain, eye pressure, and those are not things that are categorized in the cluster headache description or diagnostic criteria. So you can see that even though, as we've said now 3 times, the diagnostic criteria for each is fairly ambiguous in certain areas, they are all different from one another, different enough that they are their own individual conditions. And so, again, reading through the diagnostic manual takes some time. I had to read through this one a bunch of times, and I'm sure I didn't do an excellent job of distinguishing the characteristics very clearly, but it just takes time to kind of go through them and appreciate each of the individual criteria, what the description is, why it is the way it is, and some of the other footnotes that they have relating to each condition. So make sure to bookmark the classification website. Make sure to take time to read through it. Make sure to Google any words that look weird, because some of the words in here are very, very medical, basically Latin words, and so you have to figure out what they mean to fully understand what's going on. But once you kind of get a basic idea, you can understand the basics about what a chronic migraine is versus new daily persistent headache versus cluster headache, and how they're interestingly different, as well as some of the overlap that each of them share, because they're always going to have some overlap. Of course, pain is going to be one of them. So that being said, thank you to Michael for putting a good question out here. Sorry that the answer was probably a little dense and poorly articulated by me, but if you have a question, if you have a story, if you have your own migraine story, or you have a comment that you want to be on the podcast, you think that there's something important that needs to be said about either your condition or your understanding of the migraine world, please hit me up on social media. I try to ask every week before I do a podcast recording for suggestions, but if you have one, you can of course shoot me a Facebook Messenger post. You can hit me up on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or on my Facebook page. All of those are good ways to get a hold of me. That being said, hope that answers the question, and let's get to the end of the show. All right, everyone, that is going to wrap up this week's show. Thanks for listening. I always appreciate when people make it to the end of the podcast, and I really appreciate it when people reach out after they've listened to the podcast on whatever podcast service they use, or if you're listening on YouTube, they reach out in the comments section and give some thoughts, share their experience, help link me to articles that I might not have been aware of, and help educate me in the process. This is definitely a community-driven thing, even though this is a one-person operation here. I do it because I like it. I do it because I think it fills a need, and it just at least gets conversation going between people who are in constant pain and either have decades of experience and can share things with us, or people who are new and asking questions and can find helpful answers. So that's the point of all of this, is to help connect. It's to help connect the migraine community. And to that end, we have a Facebook support group, which you are free to join if you want. There are a couple questions to filter out the spam bots out there, but if you answer those questions, you will be allowed in. You can just check it out on Facebook. It's the Migraine Guys support group. We have about 1,200 members now, but we are very, very active. Many of us know each other pretty well in the group, especially the ones who post the most frequently. And so if you feel isolated, you feel like your doctors don't understand, or your spouse or a significant other doesn't understand, you feel like your family and friends don't, you feel like your employer is a jerk, or that you just wish people would listen to you, you can, of course, check out that group, and we will always be there so long as Facebook is around and the internet works, to answer your questions, your comments, to help you feel connected and not isolated, because chronic pain is a horrible enemy to face, and it's nearly impossible to face alone. And so if you're feeling alone, you don't have to. You can reach out to people who are in similar circumstances and be empathized with, and that's the ultimate goal of everything we do here at the Migraine Guy. So I'm going to end with the same way I end every podcast. It's because I really mean it, and I want it to be instilled in each and every one of us that you are not alone. If you want to help keep everything that the Migraine Guy does free, then you can become a patron over at the website patreon.com. That's Patreon.com. Patreon lets people contribute funds to other people whose work they value. Becoming a patron does things for me, such as allowing me to buy new products so that I can do product review videos, so that you know whether or not a given migraine product actually works before you buy it. It also helps me do things like upgrade the microphones and cameras for both the YouTube channel and this podcast. And more importantly, it helps me be accountable to you, my migraine community. You can pledge as low as $1 a month if you want to, and every single dollar does help. Just head over to patreon.com/themigraineguy to become a patron today.